Today we will be beginning our introduction to cell transport. So cell transport is just going to be the movement of substances across the cell or plasma membrane. This is either going to be into or out of the cell. Remember, the cell's membrane is selectively permeable, also known as semi-permeable. This just means that it's able to regulate and control what molecules are able to enter as well as leave the cell. This allows the cell membrane to help maintain a state of homeostasis within the cell. Let's think back to our previous knowledge on homeostasis. So homeostasis just refers to the dynamic balance or equilibrium within the cell or a body. It is an organism's ability to keep a constant internal environment. So if you are too hot, your body is naturally going to sweat in order to attempt to bring your body temperature down. Again, if you are too cold, then your body might shiver and try to bring your body temperature back up. So in terms of cell transport, this is just going to involve continual adjustments in transport of materials across the cell membrane so that it is stable and balanced both inside the cell as well as outside the cell. There are two main types of transport. The first one is called passive transport, and the second one is called active transport. Passive transport is just going to involve the movement of substances down or with a concentration gradient. This term, concentration gradient, might be new to you, and it's super important when we are talking about cell transport, so I'll talk about that in a little bit. Passive transport also does not require any energy, and it includes some things like diffusion, osmosis, as well as facilitated diffusion. These three types are going to be ones that we go over in the future, but today I'm just focusing on diffusion. The second type of transport is called active transport. Now notice this is different than passive transport because this involves movement up or against a concentration gradient. This is also going to require the input of energy. When we talk about active, we might be thinking about motion or energy or movement, and that's all very fitting for its name. So then what is concentration gradient? Concentration gradient just measures the difference in the concentration or amount of substance into different areas. So in this example here, we have an area of higher concentration of our blue solutes in our extracellular fluid, and then we have an area of lower concentration present in the cytoplasm. Therefore, this difference is going to create a concentration gradient. This gradient is going to want a balance on both sides of the cell membrane. So what we will see is a natural flow of those blue solutes down across the membrane into the cytoplasm until both sides are equal in amount. Now that we have established what a concentration gradient is, we can compare the difference between passive transport as well as active transport. So passive transport is just going to involve the movement of these small molecules across the cell membrane without the input of any energy. And we don't need any energy because this transport involves the movement of molecules with the concentration gradient, meaning going in the same direction as the concentration gradient from an area of higher concentration to an area of lower concentration. Have you ever been on a lazy river and you're going downstream? When you are going in the direction following the river's flow, you don't need to input any energy, and that's kind of the same thing as what happens with these molecules in passive transport. I mentioned earlier that there are three main types of passive transport that we're going to be talking about: diffusion, osmosis, as well as facilitated diffusion. In today's lesson, we're only really concentrating on diffusion. Diffusion, again, since it's a form of passive transport, does not require any energy, and its definition is really just the gradual spreading of molecules from an area of greater concentration to an area of lesser concentration until that dynamic equilibrium is reached, until we have the same concentration of solutes on both sides of that cell. Notice in this kind of transport, we don't need any assistance from a protein or a channel or anything to help those molecules go across. They kind of naturally just flow across because they're small enough and they don't really have a charge or anything that will restrict it from flowing across that cell membrane. That's diffusion. The following example of diffusion might make a little bit more sense or be more relatable to something that you may have experienced. So if you are in a classroom, in a locker room, in your bedroom, whatever, and you spray some perfume or you light a candle, those molecules are going to slowly diffuse across the room until it's evenly spread. This gradual spreading of molecules from an area of greater concentration to an area of lesser concentration until it's spread equally, that is what diffusion is. So it's actually something that you've probably been surrounded by before. We just didn't know it. Hopefully that example helps your understanding of cellular transport and diffusion make a little bit more sense. So here you can see that we have a high concentration of those blue solutes in the extracellular space. So diffusion is going to continue until that concentration gradient has been eliminated. So until there's an equal number of those blue solutes on both sides of the cell, inside and outside. So you can see it's just going to diffuse across the cell membrane and enter into the intracellular space. Now, since diffusion moves materials from an area of higher concentration to an area of lower concentration, it is described as moving solutes down or with the concentration gradient. You can see in the end, we will have an equilibrium established and an equal number of solutes on both sides of that cell membrane. I have one more example here. Since the cell membrane is selectively permeable, that means that only some molecules are able to diffuse across the membrane without assistance. So if things are too big, then you're going to need the help of a protein or something to help get it across the membrane. However, small molecules such as oxygen, carbon dioxide, and small lipids, those are able to easily diffuse across the membrane. So here we have a concentration gradient established from the right side to the left side if we're looking at those green solutes. Those green solutes are going to represent some small lipids. Notice there's a higher concentration of those small lipids on the right-hand side, therefore it's naturally going to want to diffuse to the left-hand side. So if I have that movement of those green solutes from right to left, that means it's going with that concentration gradient, and that's going to be passive transport, not requiring any energy. I wanted to share an example of diffusion in your everyday life, and so one example is just going to be how they function in kidneys. So your kidneys have 4 important roles. They help to regulate water, remove waste products, balance minerals, as well as produce hormones. These organs are essential for excretion, meaning they help clean your body every day by removing toxins such as urea as well as other waste products in your urine. An error in your kidney functioning can lead to diseases such as chronic kidney disease, also known as CKD, or ultimately kidney failure. And this could be due to a number of things. It could be genetics, it could be a result of other illnesses. For example, if you were to have some sort of complication with diabetes, it could be due to a bacterial infection. At the beginning of the year, we talked about something called urinary tract infections, and these are treated with antibiotics. If you were to fail outpatient treatment or you were to not take your antibiotics, then this could really do some damage on your kidneys. Or it could be self-inflicted. It could be due to excessive alcohol consumption or consumption of toxins that really impair the function of your kidney. Once you've reached the state of kidney failure, you can't go back and restore the function of your kidneys. At that point, you can only manage and treat the symptoms. So there are a couple treatments in place for people who have CKD or kidney failure, and we're going to be talking about 3 of them today. The first one is called hemodialysis. Hemo is the root word when we are referring to things like blood, and it's actually going to filter your blood outside of your body. So your kidneys are normally going to function to remove all of those wastes and toxins inside of your body, but now we're doing that same process just outside of your body. So first, that blood is going to be removed, and then you can see that it's going to go through this arterial pressure monitor just to make sure your blood pressure is okay. And then it is going to receive some heparin. Heparin is going to be an anticoagulant, which just means it prevents blood clotting. Whenever your blood is exposed to the air, it's naturally going to clot. And this is actually a good thing. It's so that you don't bleed out. For example, if you were to get a paper cut, You get a blood clot in order to prevent you from continuously bleeding. But in this case, we don't want those blood clots to form because ultimately we want to put that treated blood back into you. So we don't want to put blood clots. So that's why we're just going to add in some heparin in order to prevent that from happening. And then it's going to go into this dialyzer, and this is where it actually gets filtered. So this filtering area is filled with dialysis fluid, and it's going to be a special solution made up of pure water, electrolytes, and salts. Here it does not contain any urea or any waste products, and this is where diffusion becomes really important. I've created a visual of what actually occurs in the dialyzer or the filter. Notice that the untreated blood has the presence of urea. Urea is going to be that waste, that toxin that we are trying to remove out of the bloodstream. Then notice that the dialysis fluid has no presence of urea. This difference in concentration establishes a concentration gradient, going from an area of higher concentration to an area of lower concentration. That means that this concentration gradient of urea is going to flow from the untreated blood into the dialysis fluid. This helps actually remove those toxins from the blood into this fluid. This diffusion helps remove those toxins outside of the blood without using any energy. Now let's focus on a different solute. Let's look at the blue electrolyte. Notice that the dialysis fluid has a higher concentration of those blue electrolytes than the untreated blood. This difference in concentration is again going to establish a concentration gradient. This time we have a higher concentration of the electrolytes in the dialysis fluid than the untreated blood. Therefore, our gradient is going to move upwards from the fluid into the blood. Those electrolytes are going to diffuse across the membrane into the blood until it is balanced and dynamically equal on both sides. Same thing with our salts. Notice the dialysis fluid has more salts than the untreated blood. Therefore, a concentration gradient is going to be established from an area of higher concentration to an area of lower concentration. Those salts are going to move from the dialysis fluid into the untreated blood. This makes sure that not only are we removing toxins from the blood, but we're also making sure that there is a good amount of salt, there's a good amount of electrolytes and minerals for your body. This is going to continue to occur until a dynamic equilibrium is established, right? We want a stable environment, we want homeostasis, so this is just going to keep on happening until there's an equal amount of solutes on both sides of that membrane. Now look at your untreated blood versus your treated blood. Notice that we were able to remove urea and we were able to bring in some electrolytes and bring in some salts. This is what hemodialysis allows. Hemodialysis requires the patient to actually go into the hospital or the clinic 3 times a week, and each time the patient gets dialyzed, it takes around 4 hours. So that means you're dedicating around 12 hours a week during your day to getting your blood treated. This can be really difficult on the patient, and even on those off days that you're not going, you still don't feel 100% because there's still going to be this continual buildup of toxins. So CKD and kidney failure can be really hard on the patient. The second treatment option that we're going to be talking about today is called peritoneal dialysis. And in this method, the blood is going to be cleaned through the lining on the inside of your abdomen called the peritoneum. So you're actually going to be using your body to filter out that blood rather than an outside machine outside of your body like we saw in hemodialysis. So in peritoneal dialysis, a tube is going to be placed close to your belly button into the peritoneum, and they're going to pour that dialysis solution into your body, leaving it there for a few hours. This dialysis solution is just going to diffuse out those waste products and put in good electrolytes and salts until that equilibrium is established. Just like we saw in hemodialysis, this is just occurring inside of your body now. Then they're going to drain that dialysis solution with all of those waste products outside of your blood, and they're going to fill up the peritoneum again. This is called an exchange. Peritoneal dialysis can be done from home while the patient is sleeping, and it takes about 7 to 8 hours every night. The benefit of this is that patients are able to function pretty regularly during the day, and they also feel better in general just because they're getting treatments more often. While there are pros to peritoneal dialysis, there are also cons, and it's really up to the doctor and the patient to see which sort of treatment is best suited for the patient. For example, the peritoneal dialysis means that you don't have a physician or nurse there to help you. So if you're not really comfortable with regulating your own treatment or laying at night while this machine is hooked up to you, then this might not be the best option for you. The final treatment option we're going to be talking about today is a kidney transplant. Now, not everybody is eligible for a transplant, but if you are, this is a really great treatment option and can lead to a really fruitful, good quality life afterwards. So kidney transplants can be done through a living donor or a deceased donor. Living donors are oftentimes family members or friends, and as long as you are a match with them and both of them are in agreement that this is what you want to do, this is a really great option. Another option is to get a deceased organ, and this is from someone who has recently passed away, and these are not often available immediately. Usually, there's a pretty long waiting list, and you don't know how long it will take until you are able to get a kidney. A lot of you guys are at that age where you're starting to learn how to drive, and you may have been prompted the question on whether you would like to be an organ donor. This is a question that you really should take a lot of time to think about and see if it's something that you want. And if so, your organs could be used in order to save someone else's life in the event something were to happen to you. Because these organs are limited and they are in such high demand, they're looking for patients who have the best prospect in terms of recovery after the surgery. Thank you guys so much for tuning in on our talk about diffusion, as well as hemodialysis, peritoneal dialysis, and kidney transplants. I hope you guys found this talk engaging and interesting. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.